All right, there we go. Good deal. Boop. Yeah, that was stellar. OBS, Streamlabs. Like, usually it just forgets the mic, but this time it also ate the video. I'm just going to keep this technical difficulties thing around because, you know, you can't trust this stuff. I don't think it was Streamlabs update because it didn't, like, the Streamlabs update happened days ago. Hey, Val, thanks for the resub. 13 months, lucky number 13. Yes, good, thank you. Yeah, so sorry, guys. Sometimes it happens, and it always seems to happen on a day where I'm already running late. So then it delays the show. But thank you all for being here for me. Yeah, so let's get some of this stuff organized here. So David and I got our ReaperCon swag mega boxes yesterday, and I posted a pic on my Discord of David. Essentially, when a mega box hits a David, they explode. It's everywhere. Oh, I'm sure I'm not the only streamer to have this happen, Grey Wolf. I mean, come on, it can't be about you all the time, right? It's never about me. It's always just the software. I don't take these things personally. I don't assume that it's just me. I assume everybody has this issue. Or at least everybody who maybe is using my mic or, you know, whatever. Because it could always be just the peripherals that I'm using, but... Oh, yeah. Woof. Oh, it's not the Reaper Discord, though, Alfin. It's in my Patreon. For personal stuff, I post in my own Patreon Discord. All right. I am so disorganized this morning, and I am so on not great sleep. It's very annoying. Woohoo! But we'll get there, folks, because we'll get there. But I think I posted in Supplies Talk, and is for once it's not enablement in the enablement channel on my Discord. I don't ever, like, post true unboxing stuff. I leave that to the fans, the real fans, rather than the employee. But it was so funny when he opened it. It was just everywhere. It's like, it was just boom. David explodes all over the table. It's all the Reapers spread all over. It's so funny. Like kid in candy store. Except candy store that he bought. Like mom buying out candy store, bringing candy store home, and child exploding candy all over the table. It's funny. But yeah, but now I have extra copies of some of the paint that I love. Like, I've got extra copy of Death Knight Black now. So, because Reaper sent me advanced copies so that I could show you guys how I use some of them. So that's cool. And like the Hellborn skin and the Necromancer purple, which I was correct when I told David he would really like. David likes really saturated stuff. He understands that you can always desaturate a color, but you can't resaturate it unless you add clear brights, and even then it might not be the same. Not everybody explodes when merchandise happens, but, you know, I just thought it was funny. I just turned around and suddenly there was just, like, this stuff explosion. Like, on the floor, on the table, on the David. It was really funny, so I had to snap a pic. He tolerates my picture taking, much like a pet. Like my dogs used to. David is superior to a canine. And I say that being a fan of canines, but... Yeah, right. Right, Quindy. Quindy's like, and has the funniest things to say about relationship. But that's what happens when Anne doesn't have sufficient sleep. I just had my brain, like, overworking last night. Never, like, try to, like, shop for a new peripheral, like, right before bed. Because then your brain, which already wants to, like, sit there and think about pros and cons, when you've got a minutia brain like mine, will sit there and do that for another half an hour, and you won't get enough sleep. So that was my night. How are you guys? It was like, I was just so stupid too. Like, I knew I shouldn't. But I did it anyway. All right, let's talk about, let's see. We were pretty good on the worm. We need some highlights on our red. I'm just trying to look at this thing now and kind of get an idea what I want to do on him today. Maybe we'll do book. We should mix up book. Book color. That works. We'll do book. Book and maybe highlight some red. Oh, yeah. Well, there you go, sibling. Basement, I've done scribbling. Like, I have, if you're on my, I don't know if you're on my Patreon, but if you are, there is a book, video that I think is one of my favorite videos I've ever done on my Patreon. I'll probably do a little bit. I was thinking maybe a diagram. It's hard. This one is, you almost have to do scribbling around the bookmark because there's not a lot of room here to actually convey an image. So, hey, Gratz. Oh, yeah, you have Vortex. That's a good husband. The only thing that, like, totally, like, goes above Vortex Mixer is Puppy, Agent Marvel. So, you know. If you want to, I mean, I'm gonna talk about some of it here. It's just nice to have a focused video, and I talk about a few other things on there, like foxing and other stuff that you'll notice in old books. But here we're just gonna do basic book, I think, on Necromancer Guy. But we need our colors. We cannot do anything without our colors. Man, our whole day has been, like, kind of upside down by the Streamlabs. And now I'm like, is my color set? There's my Gloom and Grave. It's like, it's never far. It's never far. Ah, sleep is overrated. No, unfortunately, I depend on it, like, more than anything. Although I am, more Aussies. More Australians. Cool. Welcome, guys. I know you, sibling I know has been in and out here and there, but for a while. And Too Dope, I've seen you before, too. Alright, we need to get some interesting color mixing going on. You know what? I almost just need to keep everything here at this point. Happy Friday Eve. I am just like, at this point, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to get all the stuff I wanted moved before, I don't know. It's like, I'm not happy about today, about it being Friday Eve this week, because I have so much to do. This is going to be like a crazy couple months because of moving and ReaperCon really taking a chunk out of my time. So the Patreon stuff is going to be like skittering in at the... Like, I'm trying so hard to keep ahead, but I'm worried. I'm very worried. So I'm doing my best. All right, so in order to mix kind of that brownish color, we're going to have to mix a bunch of colors together, right? So if you guys remember, like, when you mix complementaries, you can get, like, a gray or a brown. And the same goes for us if you mix all the colors in a triad. So what I'm looking at doing here is mixing Hellborn Red and Death Knight Black, which is this blue-black, and then the parchment color that I've got, Troglodyte Tan. And I only need a tiny bit of this, probably, and a tiny bit of that to equal kind of close to my parchment color. What I want is something a little bit lighter than this so I can highlight before I go straight up to this parchment tone. The Troglodyte Tan is a nice parchment color. Pretty much what I want, but I want something kind of between what I've got and that. Alright, I'm going to add a tiny smidge. It's going to be a tiny smidge of this Death Knight Black. I just want to darken it a bit and probably mute it a little. So first I'm going to add just a tiny bit of this. And when you're working with really vibrant colors and you're adding them to kind of a muted color, I honestly just hold the bottle against the side of the palette and put like a micro drop on there. If you're not sure how your mix is going to turn out, if you're just mixing by feel. That's going to shift us more toward a brownish color, reddish brownish color, which I like, but I want to, it needs to go a little bit away from that. So I'm going to grab this, and I could also, there's two goals here, two ways we can go here. Since I took it reddish, technically I could add a complementary color and mute it out. Or I could try to add the blue and have that interact with the red and yellow and mute it out. I kind of feel like trying the green, because the green's going to keep it a little lighter. And there's a lot of yellow in this green, so it kind of goes with what I want. So I'm going to actually do that, which is so weird and counterintuitive. But remember, we want mud. We want a brown. So, and it is darkening it down and making it more complicated. Yeah, maybe it needs a tiny bit more red. This is a really warm color, though. It's warmer than anywhere else on the model. I kind of like it. Yeah, it's close. It's really close to what I want. So I'm going to add just a tiny bit more red. Kestrel, I don't use a wet palette normally. I prefer well. Always have. I use a wet palette on occasion when I'm working on a particular project or when I'm setting up projects. But because I like to thin my paint so much, a wet palette doesn't work as well for me, for my style. So like Noel here, she was set up with a wet palette, because I wanted to go fast and really block in a lot of stuff on her. But then when I have to do finer strokes with thinner paint, I'm definitely going for the well palette. But I like to do a lot of micro detail and texture and stuff like that. And doing that with a wet palette is just not ideal, because you want thinner paint usually to work better with your really fine brushes. So yeah, it's kind of where I am on that whole thing. I do use it more than I used to. Like, I better understand now. Oh, okay, adding in some red is giving us like really nice, like kind of dirty brown color. I like this color for a book page. So we'll do this, and then when we go into highlight with our troglodyte tan, then we're going to be in a better place, I think. So we'll do that. But yeah, I'm very much a fan of, if you are a newbie painter or just starting to kind of spread your wings as a painter, whatever you started with, you should try both palettes and understand what each is good for. If you're working fast or with thicker paint and blocking things in, the wet palette is really, really useful. It's probably optimal if you use larger brushes with it, because you can, when you're using thicker paint, the larger brushes can really get you more mileage. When you are trying to use a brush that's really thin and fine, though, it's going to perform better due to just fluid dynamics with very thin paint. And trying to keep your paint at the right consistency on a wet palette is really challenging. Like, you pretty much have to hand mix, every brush full, right? Because it always is wicking fluid, one way or the other. So given that, I tell beginning painters they may get a little bit more mileage out of the well palette at first, because it'll give them a gut feel for paint consistency, which is so important when you're trying to do techniques. And then after you have that gut feel for paint consistency, you can come back to the wet palette and really get a lot more mileage out of it, which is what happened to me. Yeah, so Kestrel, the strength of the well palette is that you can thin your paint to the consistency that you need, and it stays there. Whereas with a wet palette, like I said, fluid is always going, your paint consistency changes because the paper is permeable. So the fluid wicks up, it wicks down. And so if you're trying to use really thin paint, like if you're trying to get smooth blends, or you're trying to get a particular paint consistency to do texture or fine detail, it can be much more challenging and frustrating for a new painter to work that on a wet palette. If you don't have problems with it, then do what suits you, because that's always the bottom line here. There is no one right way. Like, my goal is always just to try to set you up to win with the least amount of frustration, and to give you the hacks that are going to increase your skill faster. And what I've found is that when people who are having trouble with paint consistency go back to the well palette and just start doing specific mixes, 2-to-1, 4-to-1, with all different opacities of paint, then they get a feel for it a lot faster than if they're trying to learn it off the cuff with no guidelines on a wet palette. So those are things to keep in mind. Yeah, I think email is always the best way, Jen, because what happens is that our customer support people get kind of swamped, especially around cons and Kickstarters. And so if you get the email to them, they essentially, when they hit a catch-up moment, they catch up on the email. But Reaper's customer service is always awesome. So yeah, just email. help@reapermini.com. Yep. And they'll get to you. Like they're probably like struggling under a big load of Kickstarter ship issues at this point, or things that were shipped incorrectly, or stuff that was missing a part, stuff like that. So don't worry though, they'll get to you. Just give them some time. But yeah, so anyway, that's you've all heard, a lot of you have heard me talk about well palette versus wet palette before. But yeah, this really was brought home to me, Kestrel, when I took a workshop with Sergio Calvo Rubio, who's a really, really good Spanish painter. And he's one of the painters that uses the wet palette all the time, as is my boyfriend, who is also an award-winning, crystal brush-winning painter. And Sergio's class, though, really taught me that the differences, like the strengths and weaknesses thing, like was really brought home to me, because he uses much thicker paint and a much larger brush. And he gets a lot of mileage out of doing it that way. And it works because the bigger brush will essentially allow the thicker paint not to dry so fast in it. If you try to use thick paint with a small brush, there's so little fluid in it that it'll tend to dry a lot faster, so you won't get as much mileage off of it. Yeah, it depends on, I mean, you can make a kind of a ghetto wet palette. You can just use a Tupperware with a sponge and a piece of parchment paper, and it'll work just fine as a wet palette, and it'll be super cheap. But yeah, a nice wet palette is more expensive. I have a nice one from one of the Kickstarters. I think the Limbo Kickstarter. I got my green one. And I do use it, every once in a while I do use it on stream, because I like to kind of demonstrate. It's good to have used both. Because some people will really settle on, once they get that paint consistency feel down, they will really settle on the wet palette as their tool. Like that's my boyfriend, David Diamondstone. He has a lot more of what I call a European style of painting. He tends to block in very quickly. His light is almost more important than his color. And so a quick blocking, like really fast blended style is his thing. Whereas I like a lot more control and precision. And I do a lot finer micro detail than he does. He almost looks at things more from a big picture, and I'm more about the Easter egg. I mean, we both do great work. And the other day I actually held up like 2 of our competition level busts in front of the camera. And you can see the difference in the paint style, but they're both painted really, really well. So it's like, it really is just a style thing at that point. But for beginners, I always feel like whatever is less frustrating to you, whatever enables you to like internalize what you need to be, to reach your painting goal, that's the best choice for you. And so trying both will give you more of an idea of which tool you really like. Hey, whatever works. I mean, lids from soft drink bottles actually are not, I mean, they're a little bit bigger than this, but at least they're deep. So if you build big paint puddles, you can, the problem here, guys, is that I don't have my underlying color mixed anymore. So I can't touch anything up. Oh well, if we get into too much trouble, I'll just have to make a new mix. Or keep this as my darkest color instead of my initial brown. Yeah, your goals change over time too, Kestrel. So when I started, I started wanting to be a competition painter because what motivated me, I guess not when I first started. When I first started painting, I just wanted to paint models for the games. For role-playing games and Battletech and stuff. But then, after I started painting my Warhammer stuff, I started reading White Dwarf, and I saw their Golden Demon competition, the Games Workshop's Golden Demons, and there were people who were doing such great stuff, and really inspirational stuff, and I was an art major at the time, so I was like, oh, this is actually like art, right? So it right away it appealed to me, and I was like, I wonder if I could win. So that kind of shifted my mind from painting models that were good enough for my fellow gamers to go, ooh, to, hey, could I get good enough to win one of these Golden Demon things? So it does. Sometimes it shifts. Sometimes it doesn't. There are people who go through, you know, their happy place in the hobby is very much painting for gaming. It's all cool. Whatever your goal is, it's valid. Because, you know, it's a hobby. At its core, it's meant to make you happy and de-stress you. Give you some place to go that that makes you happy. So I'm just putting some layering, some highlights onto the page here. I'm leaving a little bit of a shadow toward the outside edge to imply the shape of the page. I may minimize that even a little bit more as we go. But I'm going to mix up some of my troglodyte tan and put another highlight on it and kind of really get some of the edges. I don't know how light I want this to go yet. We'll figure it out. I don't want the book to be super bright white and crispy. Obviously, I'm painting it more like parchment. So, well, and even the other thing, Kestrel, is that even when I talk about concepts like layering, which is pretty much just you put down a darker base coat maybe, and you layer up lighter colors on top of it, or you put down a mid-tone and maybe you wash, or you layer in your shadows and then you bring up your highlights. You know, that's something that's used no matter who you are. Like, technically, dry brushing is layering. It's just, you know, layering very fast with a texture with really thick paint. So almost any technique I talk about here is, you know, you can find a simplified version in gaming painting or whatever, you know, aspect of the hobby you're into. Let me get this thinned down. So this is where we're layering. We're going to start at a 2:1. So a 2:1 is probably too thick, but I don't know the coverage of this color yet because I've never worked with it. So I always start with a 2:1 paint to water. So we've got 4 drops of troglodyte tan, 2 drops of my water here. And then really it's all experimenting. I'll do I'll try to layer, or I'll do a brush stroke. If I was, you know, an earlier Anne. Now, the thing that I mostly do to judge layering consistency is I look at the paint as it falls off the side of the well palette. And I look at how transparent it's going here. And right away, I can see that I see a lot of color here on the side of the palette. Unlike here, see where this is a thinner paint, you can see that it's falling off the side. You can still see a lot of it. But you can see it goes pretty darn transparent up here where it's fallen down and I haven't been dabbing my brush off. So this is probably not thin enough to make a good layer unless I want to leave texture. And here on the book, I'm not really wanting texture, although I certainly could go that way. That's a thought. Maybe I will try. So we're using our Da Vinci Maestro brush today. Since I'm doing finer work, and I'm probably going to do some script. So let's switch from doing like a layering long brush stroke to doing kind of a stipple for texture. And let's see about this paint and what its consistency is then. So we can start in an area where it's not really evident, like down here. And I can kind of stipple up. And stippling is just little dots. Yeah, that's not really leaving a lot of texture, so actually that may work. I'm going to use the side of my brush to pick up this edge of this page. Can also, usually can't, I mean, it's just totally out of scale to paint like lines for each page here, but you can at least do one to kind of duplicate the idea of a deckled edge where it's unevenly cut, which an old book would probably be cut by hand in sections, so the sections don't line up. I'm going to get my previous color, and I'm going to take down, I'm going to be doing the same brush stroke, going to take down some of the shadow, going to let it kind of bleed into that. So you get that nice smooth gradation. I'm going to squiggle over here, dope, because I feel like with the bookmark here, you just don't have a lot of room for anything else. On this side, I may do a little pentagram or something with tentacles. Who knows? With books, you really have to question, you know, how good your freehand ability, your fine freehand is. And usually you want to, if you're going to do something complicated, you want to kind of draw it out on a separate piece of paper to see if it really translates at this tiny size. But I could definitely do like a pentagram, and I probably could do some squigglies on it. Tentacles, because, you know, tentacles. If he's reading a book, it's probably a book about tentacles. There are some book techniques that I'm not doing on this. Like I said, if you are on my Patreon, I did do what I consider to be like one of my favorite videos ever on painting books. And I talk a lot about painting really old books or books that have to look aged. And we're doing this one more straightforward. Now we'll bring up this other page. I want this to come up enough that it does like come up to the same color as the tips of his horns. So that's why I'm kind of minimizing shadows a bit and I'm broadening out my highlights. But yeah, if while I was doing this stippling I could see like really strong little dots, the paint would be way too thick. Because it's kind of subtle and it just leaves a little bit of texture, the paint is correct for what I want. Having kind of a splotchiness to the page also gives you the effect of an older book, as if the page has maybe, you know, some stains and artifacts on it just because it's old. That's a little bit too blocky. Wet blending with water here, which is kind of something I don't do often, but I decided to just do it in this one. And what I did is laid down a real thin film of water, and then I come back with my paint. Wet blending with water works if your paint's just a little thicker. It doesn't work with really, really thin paint because your water, there's just so much capillary action that your water instantly just draws your paint out of the brush and puts it everywhere, so you don't get to keep your texture. But there are many times, especially if I'm working quickly, where I just put down a sheen of water and then I wet blend into that with paint. It's not something I do a lot, but that's exactly what I was doing right there, just to let you guys know. But yeah, putting some texture on the page can make it seem like thicker paper, or that it's been soiled over the years. Or the pages have darkened with time and wear. Just implies not a fresh book. And I don't think this guy would have a really fresh book. I mean, maybe I'm incorrect and maybe I'm being judgmental here with Mr. Necromancer. But he just does not seem like a guy to take care of his books. Hey, Rax. 20 months. Dang. Rax with the 20. That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Alrighty. Now we'll get a little bit more of a highlight built. We're gonna grab our troglodyte tan, and I'm gonna probably just grab it right out of this well actually and transfer it over just like I would in building a normal highlight. Grab a couple brushfuls, even though it's thin, doesn't really matter. And then we'll grab our stand-in for white, which is Vampire Pallor. And again, we're using stuff from the ReaperCon swag boxes today. These are all colors you can find in the ReaperCon swag box. And hopefully they will also be available at ReaperCon and online during ReaperCon. I think somebody said the fast palettes are online for purchase now. Yeah, you did. I was just mentioning it to people here since I cover other things in that book tutorial than I'm covering today. I'm not going in depth on some of the aging processes. Alrighty. Now another thing we can use these colors for is highlighting bone. I was kind of waiting to see if I thought that it would be a good bone highlighter, and I think that these might be good bone colors, so I will probably also work on these skulls today. But first let's get this really light highlight. And since there's so much white in this, it's if I want it to layer nicely, it's going to need a lot more thinning, but right now I just want to bring out my edges a bit. You can see that's a lot lighter. Yeah, I think my book one is one of my best ones. I was thinking about this today. You know, it's impossible to always, because yesterday's stream here was so good. And if you didn't catch it, you should totally catch yesterday's stream. Go back and watch the VOD. We did metallics. And we did like different colored washes on metallics and talked a lot about what makes it work and not color-wise. Yeah, so I'm starting there just to see where I am. And it's very, very bright. If I move my palette out, you can see it even more. So I'll be careful about that. But yeah, yesterday's stream had information that I've never covered on another pro tip stream in all of the 2.5, 3 years I've been doing pro tips. So, it's cool, Basement. No pressure, man. Like, if you did, I'd love you because, you know, like I say, it keeps me going. It is actually my living. So I really appreciate all of you who have supported me on Patreon. Patreon.com/paintingbig, by the way. But don't feel pressured to do it. Like, do it if you really want it. If you really feel like it would be valuable to you. Like, that's all I ask, is pretty much. Yeah, see those dots? See how strong those two little dots are? So that's because I haven't thinned my paint enough, and it's got a lot of white in it. The more opaque your paint, and paints with white in them, really light paints, are always more opaque, because white is the strongest covering pigment. The more you have to thin them to get them to play nicely if you're doing textures or because you've learned a lot. Okay, cool. But yeah, yesterday's stream here on Pro Tips, though, like I said, totally unique stream. Like, a lot of new information. You can't always say that about the stream, because when you've been running a stream for 2 years or more, almost 3, inevitably you're going to repeat yourself. And a lot of times this is going to be very beneficial to your audience. It took me a while to realize that. But it is, because, you know, people hear it and hear it and hear it, and then finally it sinks in, right? So, well, you know, that's what VODs are for, Francis. But yeah, yesterday's lesson had stuff I had never ever talked about before on camera, so you should go and watch it. It should be still on the VODs here on Twitch. Takes a while sometimes to get stuff over to the YouTubes, but you can always catch recent stuff here on Twitch. Doing a little bit of wet blending here too. But notice how much lighter that page is, and it comes out a lot more crisp, and the highlights are more in line with what we've got up here on the crown of the head, so I like that. Gonna keep working with that. I know life gets in the way. Absolutely. Life is getting in the way of everything right now. For me, so no guilt. Like, do it when you want to, because you want to, if you want to. And thanks to all of you guys who subscribe here on this channel as well. We've gotten a lot of resubs today so far. Just wanted to say, and I used to say this a lot, but again, like, over time, you know, you vary up your wording because you know you're repeating yourself a lot. But I'll repeat myself from long ago. A sub for this show is a vote for this show. A sub for this show tells Reaper that you want this show to keep going. So if you really enjoy this show and you get a lot from it, please do toss us your Prime sub. It's free to you then. Or, you know, toss us your regular sub if you feel like you want to. But yeah, a sub for the show is a vote for the show. And that's true of any Reaper show you enjoy. Like, we've been going and doing this for a few years now, but at first it was really hard to convince Ed and Dave that this would be, you know, a good thing to do, a good place to put resources. So when you guys sub, you just reinforce that, yeah, we want this content. There we go. Quindy did the yesterday VOD link. Excellent. Oh, color wheels? Amazon, honestly. Just like $1.99. Sometimes art stores have them too, Rex, the pocket color wheel, but if you just, like, you know, look up pocket color wheel, you'll find them. You'll find them all over the place. If you have an anti-Amazon attitude, you can probably find them on an online art store elsewhere. Oh, no. You sub to Reaper in general. I mean, I just always say if you resub during this show, then you're essentially telling the bosses, you know, hey, this show is awesome. But yeah, a sub to Reaper is for general Reaper content, but I always like to see people sub during this show because it does. Justin notices, Quindy notices, you know, they notice when there's a lot of subs in a particular show. Whereas if everybody is just waiting and subbing for Reaper Live, then it makes it look like all we need to do is Reaper Live. Obviously, nobody likes the other shows. So, you know, so if you have a show, a favorite Reaper show, and you are subbed to Reaper, resub during that show I always think is a nice touch, just because, you know, like I said, our mods will notice if there are a lot of subs for particular shows. And so I think it's just, it gives you like kind of that support feel. Plus, if you sub for me and you hit 12 or 24 months, I sing. I don't know if anybody else on Reaper's channel sings. But yeah, it's a sub to the sub. And no, I'm not telling you to do it because I get any kickbacks or anything, Thormel. My kickback is my paycheck. But yeah, a sub for Reaper is generally cool. I always notice if, like, I don't get subs, right? I always notice if it's kind of like a desert. And I always notice if, like, we get, like today, we've gotten multiple resubs, and that always makes me happy. Ah, yes. Astley, thank you for the reminder. Yes, also, you can send feedback in the Discord on what you like from Reaper shows and which shows are your faves and why and all that kind of thing. That gives us actual information instead of just inferred information. You get free knowledge here, Rex. It's gonna be enough. Mocha sings? Okay. She doesn't have a show, though, yet, does she? Or did Reaper finally give her a show, Bryce? Did somebody ask about brush? I missed it. I was trying to paint, and you can just go to Reaper Live to get your food and alms. Yeah, we talked about, actually. I know there was some talk about seeing if Mocha had the time to do a Reaper show, but I don't know. She does a great show on her own, so, and certainly she supports Reaper. So we don't need her doing a Reaper show. Justin is probably like, no, I have enough shows as it is. Yeah, Mocha's got a good voice. She and Derek Schubert. Oh, nice, Thormel. Yeah, totally. If you could put a plug in and say how much you enjoy the show, that's fantastic. I should probably remind people to do that more often. Where on the Reaper Discord can you do that? Ah, okay. Thank you, Astley. Stream discussion that you can use for comments on the streams. So yeah, go give us a plug. Give us a plug. Plug away. So I'm using stippling again, guys, by the way. And one other thing stippling's going to do is it's going to give a little bit of a softer texture to this. When you're leaving any kind of brush stroke, you can suggest kind of the texture of the page. And when you're doing a stippling stroke, it looks soft. Let's see here. I want to blend this in just a little bit more. Still feel like I'm fighting this little bit of shadow here, so I'm going to take it up a little bit more. So what this will make it look like is really rough textured. Like textured paper, thick paper. I just want a little bit more water in my white, my off-white. You can just tell sometimes when you're having to fight and wet blend that your off-white is a little too thick still. All right, have fun, Too Dope. Yes, get rest, get sleep. Yeah, it kind of looks like papyrus or vellum. Green oaks. So far, it's invisible ink, but it'll change. I just like to set up my paper, because once you start to draw things on it, believe me, you don't want to go back and like highlight your paper through all that. So you always want to start. Start by getting your highlights on your pages down. Now I'm going to bring that up. Blend that in. And if you get too much texture, you can grab a little bit of thinned paint or water and brush it over. Make it into a glaze. Remember not to let it pool if you do that. And that will even out your tones and minimize your texture. So you can go back and forth between how much texture you want and like on a page. There we go. It's pretty good. I don't know. Depends on how good the tentacles are at, like, you know, interpreting that sort of thing. But certainly this scale is way too small for us to actually be able to suggest Braille. So, interesting idea, but not executable on this model. There we go. It's a bit lighter, so now anything we write in here will stand out. I'm going to use the side of my brush. Always, when you can, I mean, you can always use the side of your brush to highlight a thin object like the edge of this page that's sticking out. You don't want a lot of paint on your brush. You want your brush to still come to a natural sharp point. That's a sign that you have not overloaded your brush. And then you can just run it across that edge and the paint will just adhere magically. And you don't have to worry about actually following the straight line. Sadly, you cannot do that if you're coming in to do kind of that deckled edge. Uh-oh. I was like, if that was going to park outside, I was going to close the window. But if you're trying to do that edge there, that can be a little harder unless it's sculpted on. Here, I don't have as many pages. Probably could still do a secondary page block here. We'll see. So in this one you have to freehand. There isn't a lot of room to put another block of pages suggestion in here. I had it lined originally because it didn't seem like there was a lot of space to do that. But maybe I can get it to work. That's cool, Thormel. Yeah, Micron Pen always is kind of the go-to if you don't have the brush mastery, the brush control. Although I always feel like it's worth trying to do that stuff with the brush. Pardon me, I'm going to put my lining back. I don't think this is going to work with that really thin area. I think it looked better lined. Essentially, you'll get more mileage out of it for your personal painting if you do try to do it with brush. Just because every time you practice stuff like that, you get a little bit better at it. But certainly not necessary. Funny Astley. Alright, I want that line back because I feel like the book looked better with it. There's really not enough room. Sometimes you have to try it. You have to go, well, maybe I can do some pages in here. And then you do it and you're like, well, that looks like far worse than it did before. So you just go back. I have a lot of times where I try something, don't like it, and then just repaint it. And we've got some pages suggested here that we do need to deal with. But I want to, while I've got this liner, I want to kind of line around here before I do my pages. As you can see, the little page edges are sculpted on there. So we'll use our lightest color to hit those. And I may need to do a slightly stronger version. We'll see. I've thinned this down to the layering point, which means it's not as good for doing individual details as this. So maybe I'll make a thicker version real quick for doing finer detail. For really stark detail that you want to stand out, you do need it at a certain consistency. You still need it thinned, but not as much as for layering. When you've thinned it as much as you have for layering, the point is that you want your brush strokes to start kind of invisible and then build up. And so when you're trying to do little lines like this, that layering consistency doesn't work because, you know, you don't want the paint to be invisible. You want it to actually make a firm line. So I'm going to start out by thinning it around a 2:1, which should be good enough. I would guess that my layering consistency for this light color over here is actually more like a 1.5:1 with water being more than paint. That's my guess. So I'll mix up a slightly thicker batch so I can highlight those areas. Okay, let's see. So paint has to be thin enough to come off the brush nicely, but thick enough to leave a nice line. We shall see if it's too much or too little. Also, these are sculpted really shallowly, so stop talking and concentrate when you're doing them. Gonna get the edge of this top page as well. The paint is just barely thin enough. I would say that any thicker and it wouldn't come off in these thin lines I need. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of water to it, which should make things a little easier. Just like a wet brush full. Could also use a tiny brush for this because they're very small areas. Each page is very tiny. When you've got tiny little short details like this, you could totally get away with the tiny brush because you only need to do a very short stroke. So if the paint dries a little bit faster in the brush, it really doesn't matter. Pages. I don't get lunch until I take my walk. Oh, and hey, this afternoon is my personal stream over on twitch.tv/paintingbig. I do a personal stream once a week. And we work on usually competition models. Uh-oh. A little bit too blorfy. Thank you for the plug, Quindy, the link. So yeah, if you're interested in seeing me paint more high-end stuff, and usually we do bigger models as well. We do things like busts and 75 millimeter. So yeah, then head on over. It starts around 4 p.m. USA Central Time before Reaper Live. And we pretty much go up to Reaper Live. Oh, I have a tangled hair in my brush. Let me get that worked out. Looks like a couple hairs got bent. Let me try to iron those out here. Sad little brush. Sometimes you'll get that where just because you've been like doing things with your brush, a couple of hairs will kind of get bent and kind of go through the brush, and there'll be this little loop of hair. Just gently straighten them out. With time, they should go back to normal. But yeah, we'll be working more on Halfling Assassin today. We'll probably finish up the texture on the cape and work a bit on our freehand. I'm almost done with that texture, so we're very perilously close. All right. Any other? Yeah, these little. There's still a couple of little tiny pages underneath the bookmark. I'm totally getting coffee before that stream, so that my brain makes it through. Just doing little touch-ups and stuff. We already did the underside of the book as far as picking out the details. It's in shadow, so you don't want to do much more than that. All right. Ah, that was a blurf, that last one. Gently dab at it with your brush full of water and just spray it. There we are. It looks pretty good there. I could do a little bit more on this other side to bring it up more like this side, because we got still a pretty dark shadow there. Although it is kind of in shadow when I look at it. If I tilt it to the light, I'll add a little bit of light there. We've almost are ready to do letters. Now it's Julie who wants the coffee. Paper clips? All right, a little bit of stippling just to lighten this area up a bit. And maybe a light glaze. There we go. There we are. It's looking a little better. There. Still feel like I missed a little bit of a highlight there. I'm persnickety. What can I say? The paint would probably flake, Pendrake, unless you had a very sharp blade that we're using, but you also, these are really, they're just really thin, and they're also curved, so I think it's much easier just to draw the lines on and gives you better practice with your painting. In order for that kind of scrape thing to work, you really need the dark to be more like wax, softer, so that it doesn't flake. Paint definitely dries hard enough to flake when you drag a knife over it, so... And maybe. But yeah, doing it in a curved line on these little details would be really hard. Harder than just trying to use a paintbrush or a pen. There we go. Nice clean page. Or dirty clean page. Oh, yeah, that would be even more problematic, I think. Plus, the problem is your knife, if your knife is hard enough to go through the top layer, it's hard enough to go through your dark layer and end up just going to the metal or plastic. So if you had black plastic, maybe. But even then, I think you'd run into paint flaking. All right, let's just grab our Death Knight. And I think I am using a bit of walnut to do these, to do the lettering, mixed with some Death Knight black. When you're doing any tiny fine details, but that you want them to be really, really stark and clean, use a high coverage dark. So although I am going to mix a little Death Knight black into this, I am using Walnut Brown 9136, which is one of our highest coverage darks. Nightmare Purple, Nightshade Purple 9022 is also very, very, very dark and high coverage. And you could, of course, use black if you really wanted to. Oh, by removing wet paint? Yeah, I don't know. No idea, Pendrake. You have to work pretty fast, probably. Although at that point, you're still making the letter lines, like, you're still, like, actually doing the work, so why not just use paint, I guess? Unless you have a problem with blobby paint. But here, guys, alright. So, when you've got a nice well palette, you can thin your paint, and then you can kind of practice doing little marks and see if it is dark enough. If it is not dark enough on your palette, or on your thumbnail, as many people use, you can add in a little bit more of like your black or your walnut or your whatever has a very heavy load of high coverage black pigment. The challenge here is in getting your paint to stay dark enough when it's thinned to the point that you can do the little marks you need to do for lettering. Because of course the more you thin it, the more transparent it goes. So you're looking kind of for a sweet spot. Yay, Alphen! Awesome. You're one of us. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the content. I'll send you an email. I send everybody an email. Well, I mean, go ahead and try it, Pendrake. I don't know. I mean, it works with, they used to do that in traditional arts. There's at least one traditional painting art that uses that kind of effect. But I just can't remember the name of it. Oh, time to stretch. We are going to go a little over today because we started a little late, but I need to stretch badly because my elbow's kind of like giving me issues. Too much computer gaming. Oh, so if you've been sitting on your rump like me and not doing anything more than staring at tiny little plastic people or your work screen, stand up. Give a stretch. Just a little stretch. Any stretch helps. I guess I should actually reposition this guy so you can like stare at him while I do my stretch. I'm lax today. There we go. And our screaming operatic worm. We forgot. We need our screaming operatic worm. Actually, now that I'm looking at him, he looks kind of embarrassed. He's like, oh crap, did anybody hear that? Like, it's the worm. The worm's like, la! And he's like, ah! Stop it, worm, stop it! We were trying to be sneaky. He does kind of look like that now. He looks kind of startled. Now that I've seen that, I cannot unsee it. Well, doesn't he, Quindy? Doesn't he look like... Oh, oops. It kind of looks like that. I'm going to do my floor exercise, guys. I'll be right back. Yay! All right. Morning, Nora. Yep. Yeah, it was stretch time. It was late stretch time because I started late this morning. Running late, just not got good sleep, and that put my whole morning like 5 minutes behind. And then we had technical difficulties coming into the stream because Streamlabs upped the stakes by deleting my intro as well as my microphone. Thanks, Streamlabs. No thanks, Streamlabs. It's like, oh yeah? Keep saying that. I'll get you even worse next time, is what it says. All right, so let's do some letters. Letters. Let's try to get our thing in focus right where we need it. There we go. Oh, running late there, yeah. Well, you know, willpower basement. Green Oak's probably the Halfling Assassin because I haven't gotten, I don't think Noel's going to get done. Noel is a really, she's a good project to bring to the con and work on at the con because she's all one piece. So I think probably Halfling Assassin Girl is probably the only one because we're moving. We're moving next week and then ReaperCon is a week after that. So my life is going to be disrupted for an entire week of finishing packing and then unpacking and setting up the new house. Plus in there I have a travel to visit my family a couple days. So next week is shot for me. So yeah, and then the week after is like we have 1 week and then ReaperCon. So probably the only girl who's gonna get done is Ms. Really grumpy assassin girl here with her muddy feet and her cool freehand. So she'll get done for the con because she's really close. It'll give me a good impetus to push to finish her. Yeah, I mean, it was my competition that I helped to build Green Oaks. So, I mean, I actually like actively ran it for many years. I think Michael took over after I'd been on it for 10 years. So I didn't feel right entering it for all those years. So I think the first time I entered it is actually like a couple of years back when I won a gold with Soldier. So my Soldier 76 statue. So entering is like, entering for me is like, I don't feel like I have to, because for so many years I just ran the competition. But if I do have anything like prepped, then the fact that I can enter the competition now is kind of novel. So, but this year, yeah, we just had a lot of real life stuff hit. I thought I was going to have time to get more done than I did, which always happens, right? And then it's just, like I said, it's a perfect storm of moving stuff. All right, let's do some scribbles on the one side, at least, before we get this done. So, like I said, you want your paint thin enough. You need it thick enough to make a good dark line, at least dark enough to show up on the page well. But thin enough that it comes off your brush pretty strong. That's actually great. See how this was much thinner? Then I added in one more drop, and now I can make these little scribbly shapes, which are words. Really, they are. Yeah, it should be cool. I hope people have gotten a lot of really cool stuff painted for the competition. I mean, since I was one of the people who built the competition, I still feel like it's my baby, kind of. So I get all like choked up when I see you guys enter so much awesome stuff. Like that really, it always makes my day. Especially when it was for a while there, it was just like, begging people to enter. And now it's like the opposite. All right, so you want to kind of make little squiggly marks. You want them to be ideally of different lengths. If you accidentally do a series of dots like that, you can always just connect them. Any little blorfs or vertical like strokes tend to read just as different letters, so you're good. And you just want to use the very tip of your brush. Try to keep your lines like fairly evenly spaced, but if they're not, or they get a little crooked, it's okay, because, I mean, these people, whoever wrote in this book did it by hand or tentacle. So they're not going to have perfect penmanship. It's a little bit different if you're trying to do a very orderly, like, holy book, where they probably aligned all their pages and made everything look wonderful. But I'm literally like painting with the very tip of my brush to do these. And the most important places to get it equally, like evenly lined up, is at the top and the bottom. If everything else is a little bit off kilter, it really doesn't matter, as long as your writing is pretty well spaced on the very top and the very bottom line. Because that's where people are going to be comparing, like, the distance is the top of the page and the bottom. So we have lots of little writing. And now on the other side, let's do a little pentagram. Yeah, I never was good at decals. I found them, I tried to work with them and got so frustrated with them. And then it seemed like I could never find exactly the decal I wanted for something at the right size. Now, of course, you can actually print them onto decal paper, like, so you could use a art program to make exactly the one you want and then print it. But, back when I was starting to work with all this stuff, that wasn't the case. So now it's nice that I have my parchment colors back up, or still up, guys. So here, if I do screw up my pentagram, I can paint over it, right? So I'm going to actually thin down my paint a little bit, though. And the reason is that it's going to be much easier if I do make a blorf. It's going to be much easier to fix it if my paint is thinner and my line is lighter. So what I'm doing here is I'm thinning down my dark paint so that I can essentially sketch with the brush. So it'll be really light and it'll be easy to cover over if I make a mistake, and I can just go over it after I make the shape. Yeah, I thought they did, Pendrake. I was pretty sure that for like holy books and illuminated manuscripts, they actually had a way to line, to make sure everything stayed nicely spaced. Right, exactly. That was my problem, was positioning them, getting them smooth, making them blend in, or just not getting them all scrunchy. Like, I just had really bad luck with them. So since I was already a 2D artist, so I'd been working, I was really good with a pencil. I'm like, well, brush isn't that different. And so I just started working on doing it with a brush. So we want a circle. So when you're sketching, then it's really easy. If I had screwed up this circle, if I needed to like make the line slightly different or maybe make it a little rounder on the bottom, I can just touch it up really easily with my parchment colors. And once I've got my design sketched in, it's much easier to just take my existing dark paint then and make it a little more solid. Yeah, decals are all or nothing, and I always hated that. I felt like I trusted my brush more. And now I'll see all the deficiencies of my star drawing. Although it doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah, I definitely needed to go higher here. And then thinner there. So I'm going to adjust my pentacle. Pentagram. But like I said, I've got parchment still mixed up, so it's really easy to come in and just touch it up to make sure that all my little star points are equal. Once I figure out how I screwed it up, because I always have one side that's a little heavier loaded than it needs to be. So I just figured that out, and now I'm adjusting it. Again, using the thinned paint. Which made it a lot easier to paint over and wipe out that line than if it had been very bold. Have a little bit too much paint in my brush, and that's what makes that little blorf there, but it's not too bad, so I can keep it. Now I can take in my thicker paint and go around very slow, and this time you can just take it section by section. And you can fix stuff if you see something that you still need to fix by doing a heavier line or whatever. Just go slow though. This is key when you're doing a complex shape and you're just as doing the equivalent of inking in your sketch. Although that's of course a misnomer, but it's the equivalent of, the concept is the same. Making your sketch cleaner and heavier. Just go slow. Because you only have to do like one little segment at a time. But yeah, people who get really good at decals definitely have it, a tool that can really be impressive when you blend them in and like paint over parts of them to really make it appear that you did all that freehand. Like, if you are not a freehand person. Or if you just have to do a lot of like shoulder pads on Space Marines or whatever. Or big insignia or complex stuff on vehicles. Okay, we have a star. We've lost some of our interior spaces on those tiny little arms. Points of the star, but I can fix that by taking my thicker paint here and kind of again putting little pinpoints. You may go back and forth, and how much you go back and forth on this stuff to kind of refine it is entirely up to you on how nice you want it to look. If it's a competition entry, maybe you spend a little more time on it, making it like as perfect as you can get it. Never ever work on it when you get to the point of frustration, though. You never want to get to that point where you're just ready to throw it at the wall. And now when I'm zoomed in, it's very easy to see areas where, say, my line is a little thicker here. So I can come in from the outside and just trim that down with a little bit of parchment. It's much easier to put down a thick line and then thin it by using your outside color. And then it makes it look very delicate and like you painted it that way in the first place, and it's really impressive. All right, I'm very happy with that little pentagram, actually. I think it's pretty cool. Looks good. Looks very neat. Now let's do some tentacles. I'm going to sketch these in again. And we might also want some little runes up in the corner here, up in the corners there. Maybe I want to do those first. Maybe we'll work on tentacles next time. Let's do that. So we're going to use our thicker paint for this, the same one we used for our little tiny letters on the other side. I'm going to test it on my palette to make sure that it's still the right consistency. When you're going to do this sort of thing, always test it. You can test it on your thumbnail, you can test it on the palette. You just want to be able to make those tiny little marks. Before you put it on the actual miniature, you want to make sure you can do that. Paint consistency is really king for doing tiny details like that. I made that look easy. Thanks, Bryce. That's the highest compliment, I think, you know, if you make it look super easy. I tend to do modified Norse runes just because I know a lot of the shapes, because I had a Norse rune set. So when I go to do runic shapes, I tend to just do kind of like start with a Norse rune and just alter that in some random way. That, and I know some of the planetary symbols, like for Mercury and stuff, alchemical symbols. So I'll modify those. Or you can look up rune sets that other people have made. Astrological symbols are great ones to base stuff off of. It's good to have a combination of straight lines and curved lines. And nothing has to be super clear. Like, your rune does not have to be recognizable. Although if parts of it are recognizable, that can make people impressed and excited. Because they can actually kind of read it, quote unquote. But usually you just need a few little squiggles. I'm going to make this one up in the upper corner a little clearer. It got a little bunched because it's up on a curve there. But getting good at freehand, like these little bits of freehand, is really just practice. It's practice, and it's just nailing the paint consistency. And nailing the paint consistency... Oh, a little bit of a blurf, but we can work with that. Nailing the paint consistency isn't as hard as it looks, because you can always practice, like I said, on your thumbnail or on your palette. Like, when you can do that, when you can just kind of adjust your paint until you can make marks that are appropriate on, like, your palette surface or your thumbnail, then you just have to figure out the consistency. Once you've got that consistency, kind of mix it around with your brush and kind of, like, think about it. Go, oh, all right, so that's not really watery, but it does, if I drag a brush through it, it does, here, this is a good test for you guys to know if you're working with a well palette. So if you drag your brush through it, does it close up again? This does. And let me show you on a color you can actually see a little bit better. So a test I will do is the self-leveling test. If you drag your brush through the paint, does it close up again right away? You guys couldn't see it because of the dark color, but this closed up, but just a little bit slower. So if you use that viscosity test to see how thick or thin your paints are, you'll start to get a feel for, like, this one closed up very slow. So it's really thickening, right? So this one, it closed up a bit more like that. And this one I probably also could do. It means if it closes up a little slower, what it means is it's usually got fairly high coverage still. But it's still, because it did close up and your brush stroke didn't stay, it does mean it'll flow fairly well off of your brush as long as you've got enough fluid loaded into your brush. So I used a lot of that kind of test to start to get a gut feel for what consistency of paint I needed to get the effects I wanted. So because that medium parchment color is, a bit higher viscosity, a bit more gloopy, but still rolls, closed, I know I can use it. I know it's at exactly the right viscosity for this sort of thing, and I can use it to touch up my blurf shapes. Do be aware that the paint, when you get that little paint in your well, because that was kind of a quick mix, the paint will be tacky at the edge, and so it'll be a little bit more viscous there. So if you don't want a thicker paint, you want to mix it up before you pull from it, essentially. There, we've got some little symbols. I think I need that one to go a little closer to the one to be kind of evenly spaced a little bit. So I'll modify that one. Maybe I'll give it another tail. Anything to get it to play a little closer. Yeah, it's looking good. This guy could be a little closer too. Although he's pretty good. I like the lightning bolt shape, so I'm not going to modify it. I'm just going to bring this up a little bit. And make sure your brush has a nice good tip too. Make sure it's not gone kind of paddle shaped or anything when you unloaded it. There. Everybody's grouped nicely now. And I'm trying to decide if I want tentacles coming up from the bottom of the page or if I want tentacles coming down from the top of the page. This is my question. Where do I want my tentacles? What direction are my tentacles going? It's time to call this one, so I'm gonna have to think about it. But the last thing I want to point out is in putting colors on a page. you're going to have to use really bright colors to have the colors read, or have the color take up a lot of the page. So like if I do 3 big tentacles down here, chances are I can color them in with the same colors I'm using here. These are fairly bright, and those colors will show up just fine here on the page. But if I was making really small, like if I was trying to color in my pentagram here, I would have to use really bright colors for those colors to really be visible. So again, we're back to the smaller the detail, the brighter the color is necessary for the eye to be able to pick it up. So, yay. But hey, we've got a spell book. Our spell book is it looks pretty good from an angle too. Like if you're looking at the model from the way that you'd be looking at it on the tabletop, you can see that there are shapes and writing in the book, which is awesome. So there we go. And we are at 10 after, which is about perfect for where I wanted to stop. So thanks everybody for tuning in today for our book Odyssey, Crimson Herald, a book Odyssey by Anne Becker. And yeah, we'll continue, we'll put some swirly tentacle designs or something, or a spiral or something on there, next time we get together with this model. Although now, that's going to be a long time from now, because just to re-announce to all you guys, because I am moving next week, I will be on Monday, but then Tuesday through Friday I'm gone, and then the following Monday I'm gone. The following Monday is our actual move, so we'll be getting the stuff to the house, the big stuff to the house, and otherwise it's all packing, unpacking, and I've got some family visiting in there as well. So thank you all, and yeah, it'll be a while before we see this guy again. Tomorrow is Wyvern Day. Wyvern, who is almost done. I know I've been saying this forever. We'll finish up his scales and start on the base tomorrow. I think that's kind of what I've got. Yep, and we've got Crafty Creative at 2 p.m. Central Time. At 4 p.m. Central Time, I'm going to be streaming over on twitch.tv/paintingbig. So if you want to come keep me company, I always love it when you guys do show up. But yeah, we'll see you later, and I hope you all have a lovely day. Thank you, and thank you, Quindy, for all your assistance. Bye-bye.